Tigray Humanitarian update. Since this is the first episode, I wanted to give you an idea of what the show is about, what I'm trying to accomplish. Now, there are several shows that are on YouTube, on this channel and others, that do a pretty good job covering the conflict, the geopolitical dynamics, the regional dynamics, the history behind it. This show will do very little of that, because this show is focused on an area that I don't, to my knowledge, no other show is focused on. And that's on the current conditions facing civilians in Tigray. It's very difficult to understand with any sort of accuracy what they're going through. I can't do that from here, from Washington, D.C. But what I can do is collect the best information out there, put it in context of all of the other information we know, and present as accurate a picture as I can of what people are going through. This is a very narrow scope for a show, and so I don't expect a huge audience. And that's okay. I'm not going to monetize the show. I'm not going to start a Patreon account or anything like that. This is a show that's for the people of Tigray and their relatives in the diaspora, as well as anyone else who needs to understand what's going on. Journalists, analysts, researchers, policymakers, humanitarians, planners, anybody that needs facts without politics, without bullshit. This show will be a resource for that. This show is going to have a pretty simple structure. It's going to start with a cold open. Then the first segment is going to be the access and distribution update. That's going to be the core of the show. The second segment is going to be about major developments that have happened in the past 2 weeks. And the third segment is going to be a feature. In the beginning, this is just going to be me talking to the camera with some graphics. As the show moves on, hopefully by the second or third show, this is going to include interviews. This show has a couple of aspirations. One is to use ever more sophisticated methods of tracking the humanitarian conditions. Right now, it's just me and some graphs and some data, but tools are being developed right now as we speak to improve those methods. The second aspiration is to have a range of brilliant analysts, scholars, researchers, humanitarians, advocates who can give us better insight on the various implications of the humanitarian crisis, how this is affecting women, how this is affecting children, youth development, how this is affecting education, the human rights implications, the legal implications, the implications of this blockade, of this genocide on the rest of the world. I hope that we'll cover all of those things in due time. This show also has dreams. My dream for the show is that it will one day bring good news about Tigray. Right now, covering the humanitarian situation in Tigray is covering a genocide. There's no way around that. But one day, in some better future, we could be covering the reconstruction of Tigray, the renewal, the rebirth of Tigray. Instead of talking about sacks of wheat, we can talk about agriculture projects that are being completed. Instead of talking about children not developing, not being able to get enough food to eat, we can talk about children graduating from brand new schools that are being built. It's going to be amazing to see the recovery of Tigray. I know it will. I can see it. And I hope that this show is there for that. The second dream is that all of the tools that are being used to track the humanitarian crisis, that we develop, that others develop and we use, will one day track the progress being made towards the recovery. It'll be just as important. Maybe not just as important, but it'll be very important to know where schools are being built, where hospitals are being built, where development is progressing, where it's not progressing, where the impact is being felt on communities, where it's not being felt on communities. We can keep them honest. We can keep everybody honest, and we can be a resource for people who want to do good things in Tigray. So that's the show. That's what I'm trying to do here. Thank you for joining. And, without any further ado, let's start the show. I want to start the show off with an update on humanitarian access in Tigray. Unfortunately, this week, like last week, like every week since August 23rd, there is no news. Tigray, as a region, is still completely blocked off from the rest of the world. No food, no fuel, no life-saving humanitarian supplies, no medicine is being allowed in due to the government's use of weaponized starvation as a tactic of war. Additionally, places within Tigray that are under military occupation by Eritrean forces, Ethiopian forces, and the Amhara regional government are still blocked off from humanitarian access. In spite of the humanitarian blockade, food is still being distributed within Tigray. Around 414,000 people received aid last week. This is an increase of around 100,000 from last week. However, it's a sharp decrease from the first week of September, where 1.6 million people received aid. The problem with this level is that it's well below the target. The target is 870,000 people who need to get aid every week in order to meet their target of 5.2 million people who have been identified as needing humanitarian assistance. This is not being met. The second problem with last week's numbers is that only around 100,000 people received a full 6-week ration of food. The rest of them received wheat and oil, and in some cases, just a sack of wheat. That's not enough to keep people alive. The problem is there isn't enough fuel left in the capital of Tigray to dispatch food to the areas that still need distribution. The UN estimates that if no more fuel is allowed into Tigray, around 750,000 people from the food cycle, from the last food distribution cycle, will not receive aid. If you look at the chart on your screen, this is the chart that I want to use until we can get a map developed, which is currently in production. But if you look at this chart, you can see the blue represents the weekly distribution totals. The orange represents 6-week totals. The gray represents 8-week totals. Now, what's very clear from this chart is that, in a way, the people of Tigray are in the best position that they've been in all year, and also for the past 2 years as far as food distribution. Due to the window of opportunity that existed in August before the invasion, they were able to distribute food in the first week of September. A huge number of people got food, 1.6 million, and this has declined since then, but it still reaches a level to where you have about 90% of the target population receiving food in the past 8 weeks. Now, that's a big accomplishment. A food cycle is supposed to go 6 weeks because you only get 6 weeks worth of food, but it can be stretched to 8 weeks and still cover 50% of the food that minimal level of food that people need to survive. But here's the nightmare scenario, and the scenario we seem most likely to be headed into. If you look at the second chart, what I've done is I've forecasted out the next month using the first 7 weeks of the year, the distribution totals for the first 7 weeks of the year, and making those the distribution totals for the next 7 weeks, starting this week. Of course, you see that the 6 week and the 8 week total goes down to where we were prior to the World Food Program food assessment, which found staggering levels of starvation and malnutrition. This is where we're headed if we can't lift the blockade on food and fuel, and we can't push the Eritrean and Ethiopian armies out of the zones where there are the large concentrations of starving civilians. Another alarming aspect of the food distribution cycle right now is where they're not able to dispatch food. If you look at the map on the screen, the areas in yellow are places that they don't even have food in the district to distribute. They need more fuel to get that food out there. Now, these happen to be areas of, particularly in the Northwest zone, that were hardest hit by the Tigray famine, according to the latest food assessment, which came out in August and was fielded back in June. In these areas, in these districts, the World Food Program team was not able to find a single household that had an acceptable level of food consumption. They weren't able to find a single household that was food secure. They weren't able to find a single household that was using low consumption-based coping strategies. All of them were either extreme high or medium. This means that there's not enough food in that district to even to share. There aren't people who have a lot of food and can share them with people who are less fortunate. There are not a lot of people that have food that can share them with the elderly or with children. There's just no food there. The most alarming part of what's going on with the food distribution right now, to me, is that the districts that are not getting food dispatched are also the districts that had the highest rate of global acute malnutrition in children. This is a red flag. 65% of children in those districts do not have enough food to grow. They don't have enough food to develop. They don't have enough food to be healthy children. This is the time that their bodies should be growing. They don't have the ingredients to do that. They will live with lifelong health problems due to the fact that they didn't have enough food when they were supposed to be developing healthy organs, healthy systems, healthy immune systems. When they were supposed to be developing those things, they didn't have the food to do so. This is going to be a defining problem for their lives. Everything should stop to get them the food they need. The blockade should stop. The invasion should stop. These children are being targeted. They are the casualties right now. Every single day. They don't need a drone. They don't need a gun. They don't need a bomb. All they need to do is block the food from getting to these kids, and these kids become a casualty every single day. As I mentioned in the introduction, the program is going to have a feature segment in every episode that's going to explore some deeper concept aspect of the humanitarian crisis. Usually these are going to have interviews, but today it's just going to be me. I'm going to be talking about a very basic concept, which is the anatomy of the blockade. Now, we're going to have to take as a point of departure for this show that a blockade exists when the access between people who need humanitarian aid and people who have humanitarian aid and seek to deliver it is deliberately blocked. That's a blockade. The blockade is only over when every deliberate obstacle is removed and people are able to receive aid. There's 1,000 reasons why humanitarian aid sometimes doesn't reach the intended target, but we're just worried about the deliberate ones. There are 3 critical choke points in the humanitarian blockade of Tigray. The first involves humanitarian supplies like food and medicine. Second choke point is fuel, and the third is access within Tigray. This chart shows the traffic of humanitarian goods and fuel into Tigray in 2022, according to the monthly logistics cluster reports. They need 100 trucks to enter Tigray every day in order to mount an effective response to the Tigray famine. The only month that came close was June. Likewise, fuel tankers. They need around 2 million liters of fuel every month to enter Tigray in order to get the food dispatched from the capital to the places where it's needed. That's fuel, medicine, agricultural supplies, shelter items, any life-saving supplies. It needs fuel to be able to be transported from the capital to the places that have people in need. The third layer is access. As you can see from the map here, most of the northern border with Eritrea is an area of access denial for humanitarian assistance. This means that not only are trucks not able to enter it from outside of Tigray, even from within Tigray, even from within the capital, they can't get trucks there. These are the areas of occupied Tigray where either the Eritreans and the Ethiopian military are holding it or the Amhara regional government. All of those places are areas of access denial. Now, the Ethiopian government says they're providing humanitarian assistance in western Tigray, the western zone of Tigray. It's unclear if that's actually happening or not, and the government has been demonstrated to not be a very honest broker when it comes to information about humanitarian assistance. Now, when you look at how these things interact, it seems pretty obvious, but let's go through it. In April, they lifted the blockade. Food was able to travel into Tigray, a small amount of food to start off. Remember, they need about 3,000 trucks a month, 100 trucks a day. So they didn't hit that at all, but they came close to it on June. But you see that the distribution of food did not increase until September. Why is that? That's because they didn't have enough fuel. If you look at the next chart, this shows when fuel entered Tigray, and it shows when distribution began to increase again. It corresponds better with fuel than it does with food because they already had the food that had been delivered months before. This is a blockade. This isn't conflict or war stopping the supply. There is no road that is safe for food to travel that is unsafe for a fuel tanker to travel. That's not the issue here. The issue is deliberately withholding these supplies, deliberately blocking them, refusing to grant authorization for those to get in. The point that I'm trying to make here is very simple. A blockade exists when there are deliberate obstacles in between communities that desperately need aid and humanitarian agencies who are willing to provide it. Each of the obstacles that you see can be lifted by the Ethiopian government or the Eritrean government in some cases where their forces occupy parts of Tigray, or the Amhara regional government where their forces occupy parts of Tigray. Until these obstacles are gone, there's still a blockade. I don't care if we see a convoy going into Tigray. I don't care if we see a tanker going into Tigray. It's only a political victory. An incremental progress is only a political victory until the food gets to the people who need it. The medicine gets to the people who need it. And it is a disturbing trend to see people, particularly high-ranking world leaders, humanitarian administrators, UN officials, celebrate 200 trucks going into Tigray when they know, better than anybody else, they know that that food is not getting to the people who need it. So we are going to wait until all of the obstacles are lifted before we say that the siege of Tigray is lifted. I wanted to end each show with a final word. The thought that I want to leave everybody with is that it is too late to save hundreds and thousands of lives in Tigray. But it's not too late to save millions more. Millions of people have survived these conditions, this genocide, for 2 years. It's time to help them. It's time to give them some relief. These are innocent civilians, innocent families like yours and mine, who can't get access to the food they need to survive. They are sitting in their homes, isolated from the entire world. No telecommunications, no access to internet, no access to electricity, starving in silence. We can help them. We have to start telling the truth about this stuff. We have to start making our political leaders stop lying about what's killing hundreds of thousands of people in Tigray. If we can get them to do that, hopefully we can get them to change their policies. But this has to happen now. This has to happen fast, because all of the delays that we watch, the diplomatic delays, people setting up peace talks that never happen, or setting up peace talks that they send insane people to discuss terms that nobody's going to accept. All of these delays are killing children in Tigray. And it's not worth one more life. There is no delay that's worth a human life in Tigray. And we know that people are dying right now, as we speak, as you watch this show. So please, let's do the right thing. Break the blockade, end the siege, deliver life-saving aid to innocent civilians in Tigray who need it. Thank you for watching the show. Good night.